to even slow down and allow yourself to think about what you're thinking about will change how you approach people. Curiosity is king. And when you want to connect to somebody else, being curious is the way to do it.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is The Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. We're teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, at home, and the world at large. You just heard from Lindsay Boccardo. She is a speaker. She's a coach. She is full of wisdom and authenticity. And one of the things that she speaks just so poignantly, hits you right in the middle of the forehead with, is her insights on generations, the biases that we have, the impact that parenting trends have on our youth today, how that shows up in the workplace, and how it triggers this judgment about ourselves and other people. And in this conversation, we talk about the things that we've all experienced and how these patterns often repeat themselves, but what we can do to overcome some of those bias that we all carry, how we can lean into curiosity and compassion, and how we can do our own part to make the workplace more conscious. Take a listen. Okay, Conscious Habit listeners, I know that this is an episode that you're not only going to want to listen to more than one time, I can promise you that, because I know I'm going to want to listen to it more than one time, but you're going to want to take notes and share it with people that you love, because our guest today is an expert in all things generations. And really, I think she's an expert in humans, understanding the things that create gaps and challenges and frustrations within us. So if you have ever lived alongside or worked alongside someone that you were frustrated by, maybe because there was an age difference, maybe there was a, belief system difference, this episode is going to be a game changer for you. Our guest today is Lindsay Boccardo. Lindsay, welcome to the podcast.
Amy, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. This is such an important conversation right now in human history. So I'm so glad we're going to have it.
Me too. And I so appreciate how you show up in life, because you do make this topic, I think, fun, even though it can be heavy. I think you make it very relatable, very tangible, and you know your shit. You've got the stats, you've got the research, you travel the globe talking to people about this topic, and they hire you back over and over again for a reason. And it's because you're really damn good. So thank you for lending your really damn good insights to the podcast today.
Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. I'm glad we're doing this. It's important.
So, gosh, I never know where our conversation is going to go, because I really do try to listen on behalf of the audience and be like, if I were listening right now, what would I want to know? Can we just kind of kick it off with the basics? Can you help us understand what are generations, and maybe even a quick, here's what to know about, a quick synopsis of each generation, what kind of makes them them?
Sure. Let's talk about, this is so important, because sometimes we get confused, old people are boomers, young people are Gen Zs, and other than that, it doesn't matter. And honestly, these are just labels. They're not even real. Okay. These are done. There's two kind of groups that look at generations and use them in their research: the government and marketing, which makes perfect sense. And in the United States, we really started to perk up and pay attention when boomers were being born. So post-World War II, you're thinking 1946 to 1964, you had this cohort of kiddos being born after the war. And our birth rates went up significantly post-World War II. And so they had an experience growing up where they would look around and there were kids everywhere. There were so many kids, they had to share desks at elementary schools. We were not ready for the wave of just population size coming through. And boomers grew up in a time where we were celebrating. We were, in a sense, the U.S. believed, okay, we have saved the world. Good things are happening. We're powerful. Obviously, wartime, unfortunately, also stimulates the economy. So we're doing well economically. So Boomers are growing up you see this play out in movies, like this idyllic time when they're riding their bikes and they come home when the street lamps turn on. But there was more happening than that. That's kind of what everyone wants to believe. There's more to the story. But let's keep going. We've got Gen Xers who were born after them, and you're talking about mid-60s, so 1964 to the early 80s. And Gen Xers are the first generation in U.S. history to have both parents working. Think about this. When men went off to war, women started to take jobs. You remember hearing about Rosie the Riveter. And so women started to say, wait a second, I can work too. Like, why not? And so moms and dads were working, but we didn't have this thing we have now, the industry of daycare. So you have this generation growing up who really prides themselves on kind of like sticking it to the man and being independent and taking care of themselves. Now, listen, we're talking 60, 70 million people in these different generation groups. So as you hear this, if you're like, I'm a Gen Xer and my mom was a homemaker, great. Try not to feel like you have to be like 60 million other people. This is just like broad strokes. And then, so they're growing up, and the next generation after them are millennials. You're talking early 80s to mid 90s. Now, one thing people start to say is, hold on, Linz, I feel like these generations are getting shorter. Like they were 20 years, 18 years, now they're 10, 15 years. Generations are getting shorter in research because the world is changing so quickly with technology that these cohorts don't have as much in common when you try to spread it over 20 years. So we make those windows tighter. And the big thing that breaks millennials and Gen Zs is the internet. That's what shifted us into a new generation. Gen Zs were born. The internet was already in the world when they were born. Doesn't mean everybody had full access. It depends on where you were in the country and your socioeconomic status. But in general, there was a big idea that the internet existed and we would use it in all different ways moving forward. So millennials are born kind of with one foot in analog world, one foot in digital world. And that is a big deal. We change how we fundamentally communicate, share information, spend money through this millennial generation. And then Gen Zs are born with the internet, growing up in the late 90s and the early 2000s. They're the first ones that were born with they had smartphones. They weren't born with smartphones, but they had smartphones at a young age. And they have grown up with access to the internet at their fingertips. And so we see now through research how technology is changing our childhood. And that's a big part of what makes us different. And so those are kind of the basic generations. There's a lot to each one. And not every single person lines up with a description around their generation. What I want to say is it really matters how many kids were in your family. Your gender influences you more than your generation does, your socioeconomic status growing up, and the location in the U.S. that you grew up in. And so this is one of many factors. The reason that we're talking about it is it comes out sideways as ageism. Something like this. What's wrong with kids these days? Or okay, boomer. We get these kind of phrases and we end up really creating a negative association with millions of people, which doesn't help anybody. Is that kind of helpful, Amy, to hear the breakdown real quick?
It totally is. And I think that there's sort of this, I think there's a part of us that hates to be labeled, but we love to label other people. And I think it's so interesting to consider that because, as you're describing, I'm sure there are people who are like, well, I was born in but that doesn't apply to me, right? We don't want to own the label, but we love it for other people. And I think it's because it helps validate the judgments that we have. And first of all, I would just like to say millennials, we're hated by boomers in the workplace, and now they're hated by Gen Z who are like, oh, it's so millennial coded. And I just think it's so interesting how we love to label these big generations and point the finger or the middle finger, at them depending on where they are. But I hear this in organizations when I'm going in to work with companies, and you hear people say, well, nobody has a work ethic these days, or, good workers are hard to find. Nobody wants to work. Nobody wants to show up on time. And they're really labeling entire generations of being, incapable or not giving a damn. And so I'm curious, do you hear that too? And what do you think? What's your advice when people kind of throw those mass labels out there like that?
I would say if you really believe that, you are absolutely going to create it. If you're a leader and you believe there's something wrong with the next generation, every single Gen Z that walks through your door, guess what? You're going to find something wrong with them. This is basic like cognitive biases that we all have. This is also where we get in trouble in every area of life, not just ages. And I'll tell you, when people say things like that, kids don't want to work these days, or no one wants to work these days, we've been saying that forever. And there, in every generation, there's a subgroup, a personality type, a temperament that doesn't want to work. That's just, they'd rather lay in a hammock. They're not driven to achieve. Some of those are some of your best friends, your tag along friends. You have a lot of fun with them. But they're not going to be driven. They're not what you might say like the alpha. They're like, I'm cool with just being a part of this and contributing some. Every single team has A, B, and C players. And I would be very careful and cautious to tie their age to the A, B, and C players. It's really looking at each individual in front of you and what shaped them, what formed them, particularly their childhood experiences, their work to date, like their CV, what they've actually accomplished. And even when you have those shortcut biases, like, oh, they're not going to want to work, or another one that comes up is like, boomers can't understand technology. The minute that you allow those shortcut biases in and you look through them and you accept them, you will create them. And there's research on this, Amy. There was research done where they took millennials like me, and over a computer, they said, now you're going to be training a boomer on technology. And then they watched the millennial trainer, and their training quality dropped because they expected a boomer to like not know where the space bar was. And so they didn't treat them with dignity and respect. And they actually created a worse training environment. So it all comes down to your perception of a person. And this also goes in the positive too. We have a ton of examples of this working out well. Is on the other end, is if you believe somebody's brilliant, you'll co-create an experience for them where their brilliance shines. So you know this better than most, how important it is to be conscious about how you think about people and how you lead them. This is no different. Generations just highlights this because you can look at somebody, unfortunately, and be like, you're young and dumb, or you're old and out of touch. And it's just a bias. Your brain is tricking you. It's taking a shortcut to save energy and time. And unfortunately, most of the time, it's inaccurate.
I think it's so good to reflect on that of like, you're right. Consciousness is awareness, and to reflect on what are my automatic bias that I might have. And they are automatic oftentimes, but can we catch them enough so that we can start to rewire them? And okay, listeners, go ahead and fill in the blank. What's the phrase I say ad nauseum? That's right. I see what the brain believes. Your eyes are an extension of your thinking. And so if we believe it is true, we will see it and experience it in the world. However, we won't notice that we're the ones that created it by our actions. Instead, we will just point the finger at someone else and see, I told you so. And then we repeat the same behavior over and over and over again. And so I think it's interesting when we're working with people we perceive to be different, whether it's a generational label, whether like it doesn't matter if we perceive them to be different than us and we have a bias or judgment based on that difference. I was just with a group of leaders yesterday, and we were talking about how you develop trust with another human. And a big component of trust is credibility. And I said, how do you know or measure the credibility in someone? And somebody said, which we hear it every time, it's how long have they been doing it? So we assume with age, it means that you're smarter and you know more. And we assume that if you're young, that you cannot be of help, which means everything that comes out of your mouth, if I assume you're too young to know, I will not believe that it has any ounce of credibility, despite whatever else might be in your background. So I think just that recognition of what am I assuming to be true before I give it a chance to be proven otherwise.
You nailed it. That is the core of the core. And sometimes we get really like hung up on, we've talked about this like generational research, that then you're in your brain still thinking about somebody else instead of saying, hold on, let me reflect. Let me be mindful of how I'm showing up and what I believe about this person, because whatever I believe, I'm going to co-create, that our brain is made to create. So I love what you're saying. You're already on it. Let's wrap. I mean, you get it. See it.
I do want to say I have quoted you many times. I will say my friend Lindsay Boccardo, and, when we're talking about, there's something about generations that's really stood out to me. And I think it's so important, which is the expectation that we have about our seat at the table in organizations, and how sometimes, again, not that we have to label everything, but it is interesting to look at how maybe was our our thinking, our subconscious and unconscious formed based on what we were taught. And so how we were parented can play a role, or how we were listened to could play a role. I personally remember my aunts and uncles being like, when we were kids, it would be the kids ate last. The kids had to eat whatever was left over. And I remember them telling us basically how, like, essentially we were spoiled because our plates were made first, that we were given any attention at all. But it's interesting to think of the child, like, shift, how, like, it was kids were an annoyance or a background versus kids were a part of family decisions. And can you lend a little insight to that, and then how that might play out in how we experience each other in the workplace?
Brilliant. This is so good. Like, I really don't need to be here. You've got it from here. But this is great. So parenting trends swing. And a lot of us grow up and we say, I'm going to do it different than my parents. And that's normal. But also overlay that with society's perception of childhood. Okay. So if you were to look back, there was a time, I'm going to be kind of graphic here, graphic warning, where babies were not even given anesthesia when they had procedures done on them. We just assumed that, like, babies didn't have nervous systems or pain receptors, or maybe we just didn't, I don't know, pull the line all the way through. So kids used to be pretty objectified and were lower in status than their parents. And you can start to see parenting trends, particularly around attachment parenting, and then moving into gentle parenting and what that means. We've gone from a society that says kids are lower than us, use fear to raise them, obedience is king, to a true conscious shift through the last century towards kids are humans too. They're just in smaller bodies. They have the same nervous system. They're going through specific developmental stages. A lot of this research around developmental psychology was done in the mid 1900s. And so you start to see, oh, there is actually something about how we raise kids and how we treat them that shapes them into the future. And so you can see that, especially in the second half of the 1900s, you start to see us talking more about this. You can even see millennials, they call us the trophy generation. The reason that trophies were given out in the 90s is that, again, developmental psychologists noticed, hey, if we just encourage participation in general, we're going to get better citizens, we're going to get more engaged students, and this is a positive thing. So we went from negative reinforcement to positive reinforcement over that last 100 years. And what we've learned, and I know everybody has a thought about this, but what we've learned is that all mammals, your dog, your cat, your kid, grow significantly faster and adopt the right behaviors that you're looking for through positive reinforcement more than anything. So that is just data. You want to train your dog to pee outside? You have to, every time they pee outside, say, good job, and give them a treat. And when they pee inside, you ignore them. Not to connect dogs and humans, but truly, we really grow best through positive reinforcement. And we're noticing as we put the paddles down and start to really listen to our kids that we can create a stronger attachment, not based on fear, but based on love and connection. And I believe personally that we are up-leveling our consciousness in humanity by moving away from violence and more towards connection and oneness. And so you can see that over the span of the last century.
Oh, that's so good. I think to reflect back on, and some of us may have been raised in households that were ruled by fear. And this idea that, like, kids, your job as a child is to listen and be obedient. And then when we raise people who are afraid to have a voice or they don't speak up, then in organizations, leaders are like, well, they need to learn how to advocate for themselves. But it's so interesting how, like, the future leaders of the world are being raised, they're being birthed right now. And if you're a more conscious parent, then you're leaning into the fact that it's so wild to think that, kids weren't taught, they weren't treated like humans. They weren't treated like people. They were treated like these, like you mentioned, lower citizens. That really was an aha. Thank you for sharing that. I'm like, damn, yes, definitely. But more conscious people, I think, are in this place of, like, how can I do it differently? How can I break the trends? How can I become better than my parents? And I think lower consciousness is they need to repeat, no, well, they can't have it better than I had it. And how often do you see that, where there is like this There are some people who are looking for progression and other people who are so damn hell-bent on, I suffered and you have to suffer too.
All the time. I would say this is one of the unconscious drivers that is happening in the workplace, that's happening with older generations. And when I do these keynotes and trainings around generations, I actually take a moment, Amy, to acknowledge this isn't fair. The way that you grew up, being hit by your parents, being hit by your teachers, being told one day you'll be at the top of the anthill and you'll get to lead with an iron fist and you'll get to tell everybody what to do and they have to listen. I know you were told that. And now you're like, here's my day. I get ultimate control and power. And now we're like, well, excuse me, actually, we're changing the way that we raise children. And power is really better if everybody's involved. And we're more, we started to shift the rules of engagement around leadership. And so there's generations that feel like, I paid the tax on the front end. It's my turn to be the boss. And I'm saying, that day's never coming. Sorry. I sing it usually because that helps people accept it. But that day's not coming for you. The world has changed. And now you have an opportunity to be the leader that you never had. It's a noble choice. It's a brave choice. But if you want to lead into the future and feel like you left a legacy and not end your life in despair and regret, you have to become the leader you never had. I don't mean that as a threat. I'm telling you, I'm looking down the pipe, looking at history and then talking to futurists. And I can see that if you don't make this leap, you will regret it. You will regret trying to speak because the world is going to fly right by you. And we're in this tipping point right now in society where people are saying exactly what you're saying. Millennial parents like, wait a second. I'm going to regulate my emotions instead of yelling at my kids and grounding them and sending them to their room. Sending a child to their room creates more separation. It doesn't actually help create their behavior. It just creates pain. Parents usually need a break. So instead of saying, hey, I need a break, y'all, so let's all kind of do some independent play, we punish our kids. And then we train them. When you mess up, separation. When you mess up, and we've learned that doesn't help somebody do well in the workplace. What does that happen? How does that translate to the workplace? I mess up on a project with Amy and I slink away and I ghost and I don't answer my emails for 3 days. And takes it longer for the project to get done. That's kind of a really tangible example of how this plays out. And it makes you less pro-social. So we are evolving quickly. And that's my message to older generations. This is your moment. You can grab it and decide to elevate your consciousness and self-awareness, or you can stay where you are, but you are going to be miserable and you're going to be an ineffective leader.
Ladies, imagine taking time away to work on you. Meditation, yoga, transformational work, a chance to have grand adventures and build lasting relationships. Desiree Garcia and I founded High Vibe Tribe Retreats to create just that. And if you're curious about joining us on our next retreat, head over to highvibetriberetreat.com. Link in the show notes. Yeah, and then I think you become the person who lives in yesterday. It's like, well, things were better in my day, and it's constantly this like grasp for what used to be, and then we can lose progress, and this can happen in organizations, it can happen in societies. But if we're constantly thinking that yesterday was the better day, we lose the opportunity to learn. And this is where Carol Dweck's work and mindset. The book Mindset, Growth versus Fixed Mindset, I think is so important because those of us who choose to have a growth mindset, we may have somewhat of a fixed mindset, but there is a conscious choice to want to be more growth oriented. I think that we are willing to be challenged and to learn and to be coached and to grow. And those of us that have a fixed mindset are just hell bent on being right and not evolving.
You nailed it. That's it. That's exactly right. Do you know that old saying, and I'm sure you have an analogy here, but like you boil a potato, it gets softer. You boil an egg, it gets harder. Like, are you the potato or the egg?
Mm-hmm.
That's really the question we're all asking. And how do you we look at Erik Erikson's stages of development through life. He watched humans, he observed them, did research, and saw that humans go through several stages of development in their life. And the last stage that you go through, which we've all seen, and I'm sure you've seen it too, is you're looking back on your life and you're saying, did I make the most of it? Did I have integrity through my life? Did I integrate my life, or am I in despair? And haven't you ever met somebody who's kind of in the last decade of their life and the high school loves them because they always showed up for the games and cheered on the next generation of basketball players? And then you have some where you meet someone and you're like, you seem kind of miserable. Like, are you okay in there? That's the natural last stage of life. We're all going to, if we're lucky enough to live out our life, you will look back and say, what did I do? You will not be looking at your bank account. You won't even be looking at the awards that you worked your tail off to earn. None of those will matter in those moments. What will matter is, did I leave a legacy? And I think oftentimes we get so hyper-focused on today, we're so ego-driven that we miss zooming out and saying, what am I really doing here? And you're so good at it. That's why this podcast is so important, Amy. That's why your work is so important, because you're not just teaching people to be more effective at work. You're helping them make the most of their one wild life. And if you want to do that, you have got to raise your consciousness. So I'm so glad that you do the work that you do and you have this podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. And likewise to you. This is your impact on the world. Is Generations is the label it's under, but what you're really doing is helping people understand themselves and each other. And I think come from a more loving lens too, right? So you are doing very conscious work. You are doing great own your shit work. And so thank you for using your voice.
I'm glad I get to. I think this is really important, ultimately spiritual work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amen to that, sister. So, I mean, taking us back just a little bit, but also so that we can go forward, can we dive in deeper to that my hurt needs to be your hurt? And what do you think, I mean, as you're coaching people, as you're talking to people, what do you think, where does that really stem from? I think generation seems to be the label it's easy to point at, but what do you think is the real issue there, and what is the way forward?
Okay, I got to tell you this crazy story that happened. I posted this one day. Amy, I had to take it down, so you won't find it because it got so out of control. It scared me, like on social media. I posted a reel of me saying exactly this. Do you want the next generation to be happier, healthier than you are? Do you want that for them? What was the response do you think I got?
Oh, I really wanted to be positive and everybody saying yes. But if you took it down, my gut says maybe not.
People lost their minds.
Oh, no.
They got violent with me in the chat, like in the, responses and replies. It was like I had just said something completely irrational and nutso. And I really had just said, like, do you want the next generation to have a happier, healthier life than you? And most people said exactly what you said. No, if they don't suffer, they don't say suffer. If they don't have challenges, they're going to be soft. This is exactly what's wrong with the world these days. And that went off into some really ugly political rant that I wasn't asking to have that conversation. And so I suspect what's behind that is that a lot of generations, I'm just going to say boomers right now because we're talking about generations that are relevant to the workplace. So I'm going to say boomers probably have some things in their past where in their childhood, where they didn't feel seen, heard, understood. I mean, kids should be seen and not heard. That was like a phrase that was used in parenting. They were hit, so their physical space was entered into, and they had actual physical pain inflicted on them. I know that some boomers are kind of proud of that. Like, yeah, you can't touch me, I'm untouchable. But what really happens is that trauma from not being cared for and having an experience that helped you thrive, that trauma stuck with you. And the way that humans, and we can see this in research around criminal offenses, we can see this in different areas. The way this works in the human mind is that if you don't work through, face what you've been through, and bring compassion in and bring soothing in, you will naturally reenact that on someone else. And it's almost so that you can witness your pain again. There's like a closed loop that creates that in a weird way brings you some sort of strange reward. And in that pattern, we create generational trauma that we pass down and down and down again. Instead of saying, wait, I need this support. It bothers me. I'm going to work through this myself so that I can show up different for the next generation. And so what do you think about that? I'm going to pause for a second. How does that hit?
Oh, I so hear that. I mean, I think really insightful and valuable to reflect on that. And it makes me wonder if we don't find meaning in our suffering by having someone else experience it, right? Like it almost is this subconscious or unconscious validation that what we went through had purpose. And I think that's what people are defending. Like, no, my hardships built me. And I think there can be an also and conversation. It's like what you experienced was toxic and it was abusive and it wasn't right, but it was societally accepted. So it seemed okay. And there are challenges that you experience that weren't traumatic that did help shape you also. So I don't think it's an either or conversation. And maybe why people get so up in arms is the fact that knowing things could be better for someone else takes the meaning away from their suffering.
So well said.
Yeah. And even deeper, I mean, I think not to oversimplify all of life, but I really think that every human on the planet just wants to, like what you mentioned, we want to be seen, heard, and understood, but we want to be loved and we want to feel worthy. And there are things that happen in our childhood that made us create these stories of who we had to be and what had to be true in order to earn that. And really, the path to consciousness is learning it never had to be earned. It was your innate nature. And when we get to that, we are a healed human and we do not feel like we need to pass along the trauma and the suffering because we're able to give ourselves what we were not given, from others. And I think that's the piece here is like our lack of healing, if we don't take control of it, is projected on someone else, and hurt people. I mean, that shit's always going to be true.
Oh my gosh. I could have said my whole explanation in those 5 words or whatever. Hurt people.
It's
That's
so
it.
true. So back to that, I want to also like lean into this. Does it then mean if the next generation has it better that they never go through challenges? Because I do agree that challenges shape us, but I don't think that it has to be trauma related challenges. So what's your take on that whole like making it better means that people don't have challenges? And how would you have responded to those, or how did you respond to those comments, if at all?
Well, there's a lot of ways I would respond, but I'll tell you, last week I was with 1,000 women, many of which were Gen Z college students. And I asked this question to the crowd, okay? I said, Gen Zs, what's something that older generations don't understand about you, where you feel misunderstood? And a Gen Z stood up. Her little hand was shaking as she held the mic. And she said, I just feel like older generations don't understand how hard we have it too. They always make it sound like it's soft and easy, but we have to navigate like social media comparison, being bullied. We have to navigate the economy right now. A lot of my friends are having a hard time getting a job. We have to navigate college degrees that don't end up in a direct line of work. And everybody's telling us like we're supposed to keep the same job our whole lives, but that's not even possible. I can't even buy a house. And they're going on about real, concrete, researchable challenges that older generations cannot even comprehend. And there's a whole book about this called The Anxious Generation. If you have a kid of any age, please read Anxious Generation. It will explain a lot of how technology has shaped the brain. But here's a very basic example. Okay, when smartphones came out with a camera that faced your face, like a front-facing camera, as I'm trying to say, the moment that happened, we saw a spike in anxiety and depression. It is not natural. How many of us on summer days would ride our bike around the neighborhood, throw sticks into the river, watch them float down, climb trees? That type of developmental childhood is really good for your brain. If you look at a tween or a teenager's summer now, a lot of it is spent in their room staring at a glowing screen, making videos, watching other people. We have a lot of upward and downward social comparison happening on social media. We have bullying. Imagine if you made a mistake in school, and instead of it living at school and then you going home and getting a reset, it followed you like a monster and followed you all night through your phone. The suicide rate for teens is through the roof. Anxiety is through the roof. They're battling things that you may not comprehend, but are huge deals. And I'll have boomers say, well, we used to hide under our desk for nuclear war fear. Like we were afraid we were going to get bombed, to be vaporized. And I'd say, did you do active shooting drills at your schools? because my kids know now in any public situation where the exit doors are, how to behave if they hear a gunshot. We are dealing with that type of violence today. So anytime that you're thinking like this generation isn't suffering enough, ask them, what do you think I don't understand? And you'll be shocked because you don't consider potentially what they've been through and what they are going through. That's modern day challenges.
Oh, it's so true. Oh, man. And I'm very lucky to still have my grandparents alive in their 90s. And, when we're in the lens of another generation, we see other generations through that lens, right? So I've heard many times my grandmother, kind of complain about hardships. But in my mind, I'm thinking, you don't know how lucky you were. You stayed home with your kids. You were in a one-income household. You still had 2 cars. You paid cash for college for your kids because it was so affordable. You got to take vacations, and like to note the struggles. That's very wise to share. Like the struggles are still there. They're just different, and they don't have to struggle exactly the same to continue to get lessons. What's really missing here on all lenses, it sounds like, is compassion, like compassion for our own suffering, compassion for other people's, and learning how to break down the labels. I think labels are a cheap way of us not having to own our shit. It's like, if I can label you and make you wrong and bad and somehow then make me good or my suffering meaningful, then I don't have to own my shit and I don't have to bring compassion to the table. It's a cop-out.
You nailed it. What if labels instead were the gateway to curiosity? So it's like, if all I knew about you, Amy, was that you're a mom, I could make a ton of assumptions about what it means to be an American mom in 2025. Or I could ask you, or I could slow down and ask you, like, what's it like to be a business owner and a mom at the same time? What are your kids teaching you? What has being a parent taught you, instead of being like, oh, I bet she's an attachment parent and she does this and she's this way and she spoils her kids and their zip code means she's this and that. What if we said that labels were a gateway to more curiosity? You're never going to get away. Your brain loves to put people in drawers. It just loves to categorize, get a nice little like Dewey Decimal System going, put you in your little spot. You still have the opportunity to say, and now I get to be curious about this person. And that's where the magic is. That's most of us, because we're running at such a fast clip and we're being distracted all day. To even slow ourselves down, I know you are a queen at meditation, to even slow down and allow yourself to think about what you're thinking about will change how you approach people. Curiosity is king. And when you want to connect to somebody else, being curious is the way to do it. I got to tell you this, my great aunt, she is one of the most curious people. She's in her mid-70s. She was a school teacher. She retired. And she still sits and listens to us and will ask us questions. And the other day I got this video. She was in our living room. We have the piano that she used in her childhood, like this upright piano. And she's playing that piano and she has a VR headset on, learning how to play Mozart through the VR headset with her fingers. And I thought, this is it. The piano is still here. She's still this sweet, considerate, thoughtful, curious enough to put on the VR headset. And you know what, Amy? I felt convicted as a 40-something, because anytime my kids want me to play VR, you know what I do? I'm like, no, you guys, get out, go outside for a while. I don't even engage with them. And that's on me. And so older generations have a lot to teach me. We all can learn from each other.
Oh, I love that. I love the mix of her, like, being able to stay anchored in what was, but also open enough to be taught something new. And I think, can we abolish the phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Like,
yeah, please.
Please.
Like, if that's what you believe, then your dog ain't learning any tricks.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what.
Yeah, things are bound to stay the same. I think this is such an important conversation. My hope is that people take this and, as Lindsay mentioned, go be curious with this. Talk to somebody who had a different upbringing, a different background. Maybe they look different, love different. Like there's so many things that allow us to expand who we are and what we understand. And labels just, I really, again, like I'll be a little philosophical here, but I think that us learning that we're more similar than we are different creates a greater societal collaboration. It creates greater collaboration in workplaces, in homes, in communities, but also in the world beyond. And labels create separation. So your point of curiosity helps break down the separation and really build stronger communities of collaboration. So as we're wrapping up, I could talk to you for hours and hours just because I love how you roll in the world. I do.
Thank you. I love talking to you too. We could just this could be a 4-hour podcast.
For real. I love some Lindsay time where I could just, I feel better. Somebody once told me that the meaning of charisma, like the definition of charisma is when you feel better about you, or you just feel better after being in their presence. And I feel that with you. Like when I leave, I'm like, I just feel better. I feel better. So thank you.
The world to me. Thank you. That is literally thank you. It's so important to me. That is the number one thing. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
So as we wrap today, what's some of the advice that you want our listeners to take away when it comes to generations or differences or judgments and what they can continue to do on their conscious journey?
I think the main thing is you are going to have judgments. No one is you're not going to surpass that. You're not going to float above and start levitating everywhere, and just really be honest with yourself. Okay. I'm having a judgment right now. And then decide what you're going to do with it instead of trying to suppress it and pretend it's not happening, or run with it and let it drive your whole being. Say oh my gosh, I'm noticing I'm having a judgment about this. What do I want to do? And I always think about what is the most loving, connected thing I can do right now? And that's how I navigate my life. And this choice of curiosity can make all the difference in the world. You're going to find that there are whole universes that you don't understand or know about. And simply by asking a few questions, you'll know the people around you, your teammates, your kiddos, your spouse on a whole different level. So the discipline of curiosity, the discipline of saying, hold on, before I run with this and get write a whole story and get really frustrated. We just take a minute to breathe, watch that thought float by on that river, and decide, what do I want most right now? A lot of times, I'm going to give you a really simple example. You have a Gen Z employee. There's a good chance, because of how COVID hit, that they have never worked in a physical workplace. You're their first boss out of college. And you start to notice that when you work together, they are missing really obvious things. The way they sign their emails, the speed at which they answer emails, how they talk to clients, how often they take breaks. You start to notice all this and you start to go, it's disrespectful. They're so disrespectful. They're so entitled. What is wrong with kids these days? I would love if I could push one button, it would be to rewrite what entitled means. Entitled means somebody doesn't know the rules of the game and they're expecting the best outcome for themselves. They don't know the rules of the game. If you and I play Monopoly later today, Amy, which we would have a blast playing, if I had never played before and I was just dude, I think I'm going to win. I'm going to take this property. And you're you can't take that property. You have to pay for it. If you got offended with me before I actually read the rule book, you're wasting your energy. And a lot of Gen Zs, I'm telling you, they do not know the rule book of work. And so you're going to be very explicit. Slow down, explain the rules, and usher them through those experiences. They're not entitled. They literally don't know. I'm going to give one more example of this. I work with a lot of construction groups, and the foremans will come to me and the leaders will come to me and say, Lindsay, kids these days, they're so entitled. They all want a pickup truck with the company name on it. And I say, oh my gosh, that's awesome. You must have a lot of high achievers. And they're like, no, we have a lot of entitled people. And I'll be, oh my gosh. Okay, so what are the rules for getting a pickup truck? Well, you got to work hard. Okay, what else? You got to show up. You got to be consistent. We'll let you know when it's time for you to get a pickup truck. And I'll say respectfully, you have not shared the rules of the game with them. Because you haven't shared the rules and they're expecting the best and they're being optimistic, that's on you. They're not being entitled. You haven't shared. Now, if you gave a 10-point checklist and said no one gets a car, no one gets a truck before 18 months, you have to hit these sales goals, you have to have 0 injuries, you have to do blah, 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 blah. If you had all that written out, they could play the game. You're just upset that they're optimistic. So I find it very interesting how we interpret other people's behavior. And I hope that leaders, like you say, own your 50, own your part. What am I doing that's co-creating this? And how can I create more connection through curiosity first? That's a really big closing tip, but it will change your life the moment that you see everyone as a true living human with their own stories, their own perspective, and we slow down, we recognize our brain judges, and we choose to be curious after the judgment, after we make it, and we say, I'm being judgmental. Hold on. Let me ask a couple questions first. That's where the magic of life is. And I know you know that. I know that's why people hire you. I know that's why you're on stages and why you've got this incredible podcast, because you understand this invisible lever in life that changes everything. So thank you for letting me be a part of this. I'm so excited to get this podcast out into the world with you.
Me too. Thank you for sharing. Just, I think the stories, like, I know that there are people with ahas, especially that last one of, man, how there are so many people who can like lean into and understand the quote unquote entitlement phase. And what a great invitation you've provided for us to be curious and own our part of being like, how am I a part? How am I, part of this problem that I am going around bitching about incessantly? So thank you for sharing your insights. I know we'll have you back on the podcast for sure. You and I have always been like, there's so many ways we can collaborate. I'm excited for what that looks like in the future, but will you let the audience know what are the best ways for them to find more Lindsay?
Yeah, you can go to my website, which is my name, Lindsay Boccardo. Because my last name's kind of unique, you'll find me pretty quick. Just Google my last name. You can find me on LinkedIn. I love putting quality content out that helps you in micro training bursts with your team. So join me on LinkedIn, jump on my website, and you can get into my newsletter there. We send one out every week to conscious, loving, compassionate leaders who are trying to navigate this new world and be the leader they never had. So if that's interesting to you, jump in.
Love that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So grateful to have you on.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Before we wrap up this episode, here are my 3 takeaways and how we can incorporate them into our work and into our lives. Number 1, the fact that these generational judgments are not new is so helpful for all of us to look at when we find ourselves on the judgment train of Gen Z and millennial, or whatever the case might be, for us to take a breath and be like, this isn't new. Because if we think back, I don't know what age or stage you are in life, but when we think back to our youth, remember how our parents thought our clothes were stupid, our hair was stupid, our music was stupid. Maybe they didn't say that in those terms, but we were seen as different, and different equated bad. And I think it's helpful for us to be like, this is not anything new. Whether this is specifically speaking to generations or other areas in life, that when something is different, we want to label it as a means of protection. And that just means that our way gets to be the one and right and only way, and their way gets to be the wrong way. It's very ego driven. So I love that takeaway, that this is nothing new. This has repeated itself over and over and over again. Number 2, when Lindsay mentioned, don't you want them to be happier? We often think that people need to suffer equal to what we did in order for them to make it worth it, right? Because we need to make meaning out of our own suffering. And so for us to just, when we find ourselves, whether it's again, generation or not, whether it's just somebody new in an organization, whether it's our kids in our family, where we think that they have to go through the same type of suffering that we did, we are really, again, rooted in our ego. We are rooted in this lack of abundance, this, scarcity mentality place that does not allow us or them to get better. For us to keep in mind that they are breaking some of these generational traumas. If they're not suffering the way that we did, good. That's what we want for them. We don't have to perpetuate cycles of pain and misunderstanding for them to get the lesson. They can suffer, quote unquote, in new and in different ways. And lastly, I just think the overall conversation around curiosity how can we lean into that when I don't understand you? I don't understand what you want. I don't understand the ways that you suffer, the way life is hard for you. When I find myself in judgment, how can I switch that to curiosity so that I can become better and not bitter for your own experiences? Thanks for listening to the Conscious Habit Podcast. If you dug this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And if you're into this consciousness thing, if you like this conversation and you want to meet more like-minded people, head on over to Facebook and join the Conscious Habit community. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.